Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we're actually kind of talking about Minority Report because it's kind of coming to fruition somewhat. Now, if you don't know, Minority Report was a movie, 10, 15 years ago or so, with Tom Cruise, essentially that took place in the future where crime was essentially predicted by three psychics before it even happened. Meaning, if I was going to go murder somebody later today, the psychics would know that, okay, 5 hours from now, Nick's going to go kill somebody, and they would come and arrest me now for a future crime. We're not quite there yet. We don't have psychics, but according to the Washington Post, we do have some other interesting things on the horizon, and that is artificial intelligence. And here's what's going on. As the United States is facing rising rates of violent crime, another research project has actually emerged. Now, a group of University of Chicago scientists just unveiled an algorithm last month that boasts in a new press release of its ability to predict crime with quote-unquote 90% accuracy. Now, this algorithm identifies locations in major cities that it calculates have a high likelihood of crimes like homicides and burglaries occurring within roughly the next week. Meaning they're saying, hey, next week we're going to see X amount of homicides or burglaries in this specific area. And here's what's going on. This software, for the record, can also evaluate how policing varies across neighborhoods in 8 major cities in the United States, including Chicago, Los Angeles, and Philadelphia. But using artificial intelligence to direct law enforcement obviously rings alarm bells for many social justice scholars and criminologists, not to mention myself included, because they are citing a long history of such technology unfairly suggesting an increased policing of areas that are very heavily populated with Black and Latino populations. Now, even one of these studies' authors actually acknowledges that their algorithm's ability to predict crime is actually somewhat limited. Now, Ishanhu Chattopadhyay, he is a professor of the University of Chicago and lead researcher on this algorithm, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name if you watch this, and I quote, "The past does not tell you anything about the future. The question is, to what degree does the past actually influence the future? And to what degree are the events spontaneous or truly random? Our ability to predict is limited by that." That actually is a very good, very good point that he makes on his own product. Now, over the past 15 years, the country's largest police departments, including New York, LA, Chicago, and others, have started thinking about ways to leverage artificial intelligence to not just analyze crime, but try and predict it. They often turn to data analytics companies such as Predpool and Palantir, which create software that law enforcement can use to forecast crime. Predictive policing tools are built essentially by feeding data such as crime reports, arrest records, license plate images, etc., to an algorithm, which is then trained to look for patterns to predict when and where a certain crime will occur in the future. But the algorithms are only as good as the data they're fed. This is important. We'll talk about this soon. And that is a problem particularly for people in the United States, according to Vincent Sutherland, who is the co-faculty director of New York University's Center on Race, Inequality, and the Law. Now, historically, police data in the United States has been biased, according to Mr. Sutherland. Police are more likely to arrest or charge someone with a crime in low-income neighborhoods dominated by people of color, and that's a reality that doesn't necessarily reflect where crime is happening, but obviously the police are spending more time there given the current platforms that they're using. That means that most data sets of criminal activity overrepresent people of color and low-income neighborhoods. Feeding that data into an algorithm then leads it to suggest that there's going to be more criminal activity in those areas, obviously creating a bit of a feedback loop that is biased in multiple ways. Again, according to Sutherland, quote, "You have data that is infected by or tainted by some bias, and that bias is going to appear on the other side of the analysis. You get out of it what you put into it." Now, basically, the researchers out of the University of Chicago said that their software was basically made knowing that there was a troubled past with these algorithms. They attempted to correct for these kinds of biases. So in making this algorithm, the team segmented major cities into 1,000 square foot city blocks and used crime city data from the last 3 to 5 years to train their AI. The algorithm then spits out whether there is a high or low risk of crime happening in a segment at a certain time up to 1 week in the future. To limit bias, the team omitted crime data such as marijuana arrests, traffic stops, or low-level petty crimes because research shows that Black and Latino people are often more targeted for those types of offenses. Instead, they gave the algorithm data basically on homicides, assaults, batteries, along with property crimes like burglaries or motor vehicle thefts as well. But the main point of the study, according to the team, was to use the algorithm to interrogate how police are actually biased. His team compared arrest data from neighborhoods of varying socioeconomic levels, and they found that crime that happened in wealthier areas actually led to more arrests, whereas in poorer neighborhoods, crime didn't always have the same effect, therefore showing a discrepancy in the enforcement of law. Now, they also said that these results help provide evidence to people who complain that law enforcement ignores poorer neighborhoods when there's a spike in violent or property crime. That's obviously something that is important. Now, I think it's important, though, it's basically to mention this, and these are my own thoughts on this now. I'm not riffing off the Washington Post anymore. I think we have to understand, and I think I have to mention intent here. Now, I talked about artificial intelligence actually in my third TED Talk, and typically the intent of the creator isn't to create something that's racist or even biased, but bias can actually naturally creep in unknowingly. For example, look at facial recognition technology. There is a heavy false positive rate among minority populations, primarily because those who developed the AI were mostly white and they're testing it on white people. I mean, they're not thinking about this. They're not coming out to say, I'm going to make an AI that the Klan would like. There's nothing like that. It's just the subjects they had. These are the people that are making it, not really thinking outside of their, for lack of a better term, own skin. The goal here obviously should be to learn from these kinds of mistakes and be more inclusive. And so I think that AI in policing is an interesting thing, but to the point here, it's a concerning product, or it's concerning, I should say, when these products are used and they're not fully matured and they still have some unintended inherent bias. I'm glad that the University of Chicago's team said, let's look at the past biases, let's attempt to correct for these things. I don't think we've got anything that's completely mature. And one of my biggest fears and my biggest concerns with these kinds of things is that this is going to predict something that is wildly inaccurate. And so it's like, oh my God, we're going to have so much crime in this neighborhood. And so the police ramp up the presence and the crime's 40 blocks over. Those are the kinds of things I think that we really have to understand. And if these things are not fully mature, it is very possible that people can get caught up in essentially false negatives and be arrested. There was a case of that recently where an individual spent about a year in jail because the facial recognition system that was attached to the camera that caught, basically the perpetrator walking down the street or whatever it was, incorrectly identified this other individual as that person. He had no good alibi until it was finally cleared about a year later, and they actually, I believe, caught the actual person. So these are things that we have to understand. And as we see police leveraging things like artificial intelligence, it's not going to be 100% accurate. And these things should be vetted, tested, and as heavily checked for bias as they possibly can. I think everybody deserves, equal peace under the law, meaning I don't care what neighborhood you're in, socioeconomic wise. Ideally, we should have low crime everywhere. And if artificial intelligence will ultimately help us figure that out and make the world, at least in these cities, a much safer place, I'm all for that, but we're just not there yet. And I think that's a concern. And so as police continue to leverage these things, not all police departments are necessarily ditching the Palantirs of the world, if they consider the Palantir not to be biased when others do, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think there has to be an open and honest discussion about this as well as we move forward, lest we all be accidentally caught up or our neighborhoods be accidentally targeted or relaxed in policing when they shouldn't be. And I think that's an important consideration to make. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at Nick A. ESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everyone.